I have been a language teacher for almost 20 years, but I'm also a teacher trainer. And honestly, being a teacher trainer is one of my passions. And this is where I learned about reflective practice and its implications for ongoing teacher development. So let's begin, shall we? Before I discuss the theory behind reflective practice, I want you to consider some of the questions that I have for you and try to answer them according to your own professional experience. So they all have to do with reflection and reflecting on our teaching. So the first one is, do I reflect on my teaching? When and how often? How do I reflect? What do I do to reflect on my teaching? What form do my reflections take? Are they visible? What happens after I reflect? Are there any implications of my reflections? And what have my reflections done for my teaching, for my students, and for my teaching community? Now, the answers to these questions will be very personal and will most certainly have to do with your teaching context and with your teaching beliefs. So please consider them and try to think of them as we move on the presentation. Now, reflective practice and continuous professional development. Reflective practice is not new to our field. It was brought in the 1980s to education, and since then it has been constantly used in the field of language teaching to foster or promote permanent changes and continuous development. However, just like one of my colleagues mentioned a while ago in the second presentation, I think, the view that reflective practice has in language teaching is more of an interventionist approach. And by intervention, I refer to viewing teaching as good and bad, and then taking this bad and trying to correct it by means of an action plan, right? And this action plan is usually guided by a teacher trainer or by a researcher, and it requires certain steps for the teachers to take. And these steps are almost like a recipe, right? And after you follow this recipe for a certain period, then your teaching almost automatically improves and becomes better. And this notion of reflective practice has not only failed to foster continuous professional development, but it is superficial and it's only temporary. Usually these changes that teachers have made with this view of reflection and this view of teacher development are only temporary, and they last the amount of time that they are required to be or to engage in this action plan. Usually after the research is over or after this action plan is concluded, teachers will most certainly go back to their teaching routines and to what they know as a good practice. So having said that, we have to make a distinction between several terms that we use in language teaching to refer to teacher development, because each one of these brings something different for language teaching. And if we understand these differences and we understand these conceptions, then we can understand how to best implement reflective practice in order to foster continuous professional development. So let's start. We have teacher training, professional development, and continuous professional development. If this was a live conference, I would probably ask you, what is teacher training for you according to your experience? Not according to theory or to the definition that someone advanced. No, what are these three terms according to your experience? Now, according to my experience and to some of the reflective processes that I've been able to observe during my research, is teacher training has to do more with methodology and with teaching issues such as classroom management, lesson planning, language assessment. Basically, they refer to the principles of language teaching. And professional development has to do more, or is more oriented towards the career, to institutional demands, to a requirement. You usually belong to a professional community, and you are required to take some trainings and certifications because you are part of an institution. Whereas continuous professional development is something personal. It has to do with an individual's teaching practice, and it will always have to do with personal perceived needs, not an external evaluation or something that someone else perceives to be your weakness in your teaching. So if we consider these three terms and what they offer to language development, we can also think of where reflective practice might more naturally fit in. Now, if we look at the ways reflective practice has been implemented in language teaching, it has been implemented as an intervention, as trying to make teachers change what is wrong in their practice for the better. However, according to current research and to current literature and to my research as well, the aim of reflective practice is not for teachers to change anything. It's for teachers to become aware of their teaching. It's for teachers to understand why they do something and the reasons for this. It's for teachers to understand how they plan a lesson and if their teaching decisions and actions are helping them achieve those lesson goals. Okay, so if we consider this notion of reflective practice and the notion of continuous professional development, this is where we would place them. We would not place them as an intervention or something that is externally imposed or an evaluation of someone's practice. We would place reflective practice in something more natural and something more having to do with a personal need for reflection. Now, I'll talk about the reflection process in a minute, but for some researchers, and for myself included, in order for someone to take part in a reflective process, which is not only challenging, but time consuming, and it's quite difficult to do in an everyday teaching context, there are certain traits, specific aspect person that you need to include your so reflective practice can more easily and oh my goodness. To Wallace, who was the first to implement reflective practice in language. He says that is willingness, flexibility, open to change. And why is this? As you collaborated with me, some sort of uncovering of your teaching or self-disclosure is implicit. And you need to have a strong state of mind in order for this to happen. So you can allow for dialogues and discussions about your teaching without viewing them as a threat to your practice or as an attack to the ways, to the way you teach, but more of a questioning of why you do things and why you believe that certain actions are better for your students or benefit your students. And in order for you to be able to explain, and help others understand your practice, which overall is the aim of reflective practice, to help you and your community understand why certain actions are carried out in the classroom as they are. Now, having said that, how would you engage in reflective practice in everyday teaching when, as mentioned before, you have extensive workload and teaching hours, you have to comply with administrative matters as well, and then you have a personal life, and it's quite complicated to try to manage a whole research process while you have all of this going on at the same time. However, the suggestion that I make, that several of my colleagues also make, is to try to implement reflective practice regardless of all of this, because there will not be a perfect moment to engage in reflection. There will always be things going on. So the best thing is to start where you are right now, regardless of everything else that is happening around you. And in order to engage in reflective practice, we must make a distinction between two terms as well: reflection and critical reflection. Now, reflection is sort of what had been happening before. You look at teaching as oh, today was a really good day, or no, today was a really bad day, but you stay there, and you simply move on to the next teaching event. Whereas critical reflection is asking why I did this in the classroom, and what was my reason for doing these certain actions, and were my purposes fulfilled with my teaching decisions and actions. Now, if you take these two terms into consideration, you now know that reflective thinking is much more deeper than just thinking it was a good day or a bad day. And how do we do this? Just like any process, you have to systematize the process into your teaching life, and you need to select a time, a place, and according to my experience, someone to help you. Collaboration, a colleague, a friend, a mentor. It is much easier to engage in reflection with the help of someone else than trying to do it by yourself. And there are several tools that one can make use of. And these tools, I strongly suggest that the people engaged in the process select the reflective tool. If you impose journal writing, which is the most common used tool that has not worked, it's something that teachers perceive as an imposition, as another task to do aside from everything else they have to do in the class. So if they get to choose their own research reflective tool, the process becomes more natural, and they also become more engaged in the process because it is something that they enjoy doing, as opposed to another task to add to their daily teaching, right? And after one chooses the reflection tool and becomes aware of certain things regarding your practice, one must take a certain action. And action can be anything. It doesn't relate to change. Action has to do with doing something of what you just have become aware of. I became aware of something regarding my teaching. What am I going to do about it? Am I going to continue to teach the same way? Or do I have to do something, say reading, asking for advice, talking to your coordinator regarding what I found out, right? And finally, I know I'm running out of time. I want to present this reflective practice cycle, which is a combination of the experiences of the teachers that have worked with me or that I have worked with, and the research of other colleagues in here in Mexico and Central America. Now, according to the processes of reflective practice that we have observed, this is the cycle that that we suggest reflective practice deals with. So teacher readiness is a prime. And then systematizing the process is also important, because otherwise it's just random thoughts that are not structured. And then allowing teachers, or helping them engage in the process through the selection of appropriate tools for each one. And then collegial support. Having someone aid you in the process of reflection is quite important. You might come to realizations that probably you could have not reached on your own, right? And then reflective action, doing something about your awarenesses. And the cycle is never ending. It's continuous, and it should be continuous, because teaching doesn't stop, and learning about our teaching should not stop either. And that's it.